The night had fallen heavy and warm over the valley, pressing down on the fields of golden wheat that swayed under the moon's pale light. Crickets hummed in the hedgerows, and the scent of turned earth and rain lingered in the air. Beyond the field, on the highest hill where the wind always seemed to sing, stood a stone farmhouse. The farmhouse belonged to her, the 9-foot woman. They said she was a giant born of the old gods who had once roamed these lands, but those were only stories whispered by the villagers to explain what they could not understand. The truth was simpler and stranger. She had been born among them, the daughter of a farmer's wife, and had grown taller and stronger than any man, until the roof beams of her childhood home bowed over her head and her footsteps shook the floorboards. Her name was Althea, though few dared to use it aloud. Most called her the Great One, the Hill Widow, or simply Madam. Her husband had died years ago, a man half her height who had once laughed loudly in the taverns and promised he could tame her strength. He'd broken his back one winter trying to match her in the fields, and she had buried him herself, digging the grave with her bare hands in the frozen ground. Since then, she lived alone, tending the land that no ordinary person could plow. The villagers brought her food and tools, for she paid in gold that no one could say where she found. Yet none dared to linger long at her door. All except one, the new farmhand, Thomas. Thomas was barely 20, quiet and lean, with calloused hands from years of work on his late father's farm. When the drought came and his family's land turned to dust, he'd sold the oxen and gone looking for labor. The villagers had warned him not to go to the hill farmhouse, not to take work from the giantess. But hunger made courage of necessity, and he'd walked the path through the fields, his heart pounding harder with each step. She had opened the door herself, her head nearly brushing the beams of the stone archway. Her eyes were the color of stormwater, deep and unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was low and smooth, the kind that carried through air like the sound of distant thunder. "You're smaller than the last one," she said, looking him up and down. "But you'll do." That was 2 months ago. Since then, Thomas had learned to live by her rhythms, rising before dawn to milk the cows, mending fences, and following her vast shadow in the fields. He had never seen her sleep. Sometimes he woke in the night and saw her walking the boundaries of her land, her figure black against the stars, as if she were keeping something out, or in. The villagers whispered that she was lonely, that she had outlived her kind and would soon fade away if she had no heir. But Thomas had never believed in fairy tales. He only knew that she was unlike any woman he'd ever met, and that when she looked at him, he felt both afraid and seen, as though she could read every thought that crossed his mind. That night, the wind changed. It came from the east, carrying the scent of the forest and the hum of something unseen. Thomas was finishing his chores in the barn when he heard her voice calling from the house, deep and resonant, but softer than usual. "Come inside, little man." He wiped his hands on his shirt and went. The house was dimly lit by a single lamp. She sat by the hearth, her long legs stretched before her, her hair unbound and silvered by the firelight. For a moment, he stood at the threshold, unsure if he should speak. "Close the door," she said. He obeyed, the latch clicking behind him. She turned her gaze toward him, and something in it made his breath catch. "Do you know why I hired you?" she asked. "To work the land," he said, quickly. Her mouth curved, not quite into a smile. "To work, yes. But not only the land." She rose, and he felt the floorboards creak beneath her weight. When she stood before him, the top of his head barely reached her chest. "I need your seed tonight," Little man. He froze. His throat went dry. You're frightened, she said, her tone unreadable. Good. You should be. But do not mistake me. I will not take what is not given. He swallowed hard. Why me? Because you are unspoiled, she said simply. You've never lain with a woman, and the old blood in me needs purity. I am fading, Thomas. The strength that once moved mountains in my bones is slipping away. If I do not bear a child before the next winter, there will be no one left to tend this land when I am gone. The soil will turn barren, the rivers dry. My line was meant to keep this valley alive. Her words hung heavy in the air. Thomas felt the room shrink around him, as though the walls themselves were listening. He tried to speak, but she stepped closer, her shadow swallowing his. Do you believe in what you cannot see? She asked. I don't know, he said honestly. Then you will tonight. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. The lamp flickered, and in its wavering glow he saw her differently, not monstrous, but magnificent. Her face, carved by years of solitude, softened as she looked down at him. You may go, she said quietly. If you wish, I will not stop you. He could have left. He should have. But something kept him there. Not desire alone, but the pull of something older, something that thrummed in the roots of the world. He thought of the dying crops, of the dust that had swallowed his family's land. He thought of her walking the fields alone, keeping the valley alive with sheer will. I'll stay, he said. She said nothing, only nodded once. What followed was not the crude taking he had feared. It was ritual, quiet and strange. She led him to the upper room, where herbs hung drying from the beams and the air smelled of rain and smoke. She lit candles made of beeswax and spread a blanket woven with symbols he didn't recognize. Then, with reverence, she knelt, a giant bowing before a mortal, and placed her palm against his chest. The seed is nothing without the will to give, she murmured. And the will is nothing without the earth to receive. When she kissed him, it was not the kiss of a woman but of the storm itself, fierce and boundless. The air crackled around them, and for a moment he thought he heard the earth sigh beneath the house. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time seemed to twist in her presence. When it was over, she lay still, her breath deep and steady. He sat beside her, unsure whether he should feel pride or fear. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, washing the dust from the fields. Morning came pale and golden. She stood by the window, wrapped in a cloak, watching the valley below. The wheat shimmered like silver under the dawn. You've done well, she said without turning. The land breathes again. He joined her at the window. And you? He asked. She smiled faintly. I will rest soon. The child will grow strong. When the time comes, you will tend the land for him, or her. That is my gift to you, Thomas. He stared at her, feeling the weight of the night settle in his chest. Will I see you again? In every harvest, she said. In every storm. That day, she walked into the fields barefoot, her steps leaving deep impressions in the wet soil. He watched her go until her figure blurred with the mist. She did not return. The villagers said she had gone back to the mountains where her kind once lived. Others whispered that she had become one with the land, her body buried beneath the wheat that now grew taller and stronger than ever before. Thomas stayed on the farm. He married years later, had children, and taught them to speak to the earth as she had done. But on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the valley and the rain lashed the fields, he would wake and swear he saw her, a great shadow striding through the wheat, her hair streaming like a banner, watching over the land she had loved. And sometimes, when he looked at his eldest daughter, tall for her age, with eyes the color of thunderclouds, he would feel that same hush fall over him, the one he had felt that night when the 9-foot woman had called his name. He would remember her words, "The seed is nothing without the will to give," and know that in giving, he had become part of something greater than himself, something rooted in the bones of the world. The valley flourished for generations. The soil never failed, and the rivers never ran dry. And though the villagers forgot her name, they still left offerings of bread and milk at the foot of the hill, just as their ancestors had. They said it kept the storms kind and the harvest strong. But Thomas knew better. He knew she was still there, somewhere beneath the golden fields, the Great One, the guardian of the valley, waiting, watching, and dreaming of the night when she had whispered to a frightened young man beneath the flicker of a single lamp, "I need your seed tonight, little man."